So I might get started. I'll just, I think in terms of
Chris?
Sorry.
Actually, that was the first thing I was going to do was thank, which we haven't done yet, thank our translators for their work. Yeah. Because it's a very it's a difficult job. It's very
Especially from Australia.
yes, from me. Yes, I'll take that one on. No, it's true. They're dealing with people who speak English in different ways, and people who speak slowly and quickly, and it's very important that they're here. So our friends from Colombia are included in the conversation, which is very important for this work. So we have a bit of a change in the agenda. The field trip, I understand, is no longer going ahead possible. But there are other cultural experiences here. There's a museum, I think, that people can visit. So what we might do, we'll make some adjustments for that. The other adjustment is yesterday we didn't talk about the methods for the project, so I need to go through that this morning. So what I suggest is perhaps that I'll just do a quick summary of what happened yesterday, and we can reflect on that. And then we can talk about the methods, and maybe we'll do that for about an hour, and then have a break, and then we can come back and talk about the implementation and key milestones. Now, given that there'll be a bit of a break there, and people can work on or experience what is around here, but I think it would be good if I have some time with the representative of Colombia and a bit more time with the representative of Peru, just to talk about next steps in terms of participation in the project. So this was day one. It's our circle. Just went through that, and then day two. What we set out to do was to build an understanding amongst the group about issues related to Indigenous economic development, participating countries and our countries, and projects in terms of the interests of the report, and also case studies. And to do that, we set out some proposals about what that would look like, tested that review, and then we had our experience in Old Quebec. And some thanks again to Marie Chantel for making that happen and for informing us about the history of Quebec. Our line is here. I was going to plug this book. It's just one of these other books. That's another book coming out. It's over Christmas. So people can look out for that. Anyway, our circle got bigger. And it was great to have Ryan here. Great to know much about his background. But this to the chair of the office is a lot of there's so great to be here. He's one of the main leaders in Australia, so that we can share with those out of one. So what we did yesterday is, as I said, set out some of the proposal around the thematic report, and got some feedback on that, and also you heard from you guys about what's going on in your countries. And what I did was just from the presentations that you made, just to develop some common themes that best we heard around that. One was around the importance of business development, which is great. Within that is how businesses innovate and participate in value chains. Well, we heard about the view about land as an asset for development, and some of the issues around that, particularly in terms of the regulatory framework, and issues of tenure, as well as form barrier or uncertainty around as well. In terms of working with Indigenous communities, we've heard about the importance of dialogue, this term of informed consent kept coming up, and the importance of communities having a vision for development that is well informed and designed by that community. And then we also discussed different aspects of governance, how communities are linked to other governance bodies, how they influence planning and decision making of government agencies, those frameworks as well. So there were some common themes, obviously there were differences, but there were some common themes within coming through the different countries. And then we ran through the thematic reports and the case studies, and I think from our point of view, there was, I guess, there wasn't any disagreements, but general agreement with what we had put forward. But making sure that in the thematic report we highlight good practices which are occurring, which different jurisdictions can learn from. But there are different arrangements and regimes around the management of land within countries and between countries, and we need to acknowledge those differences. The work that we developed through this report needs to provide a business case to support policy change and programmatic change as well. It's very important. It's not the responsibility of the OECD to implement, but it is the responsibility of the OECD to come up with good quality advice, which is based on evidence, which governments and communities can act on. Then, again, flowing through, it links back to the theme we talked before about dialogue, informed consent, informed decision making. Was this focus on the capacity of communities to be involved, manage and benefit from regional economic development. And then in the case studies, we had an exercise where countries were began to think about how they might implement them. I think there was general agreement about the focus on rural, different types of rural. There's rural close to city, rural remote. Generally, a focus on rural economies. There were some questions about scale, and I think this is, for us, I guess in terms of the territory that we're looking at, there needs to be some economic function for that territory. That can be either through the flows of labour, which means that a territory is interconnected, but that people are commuting to work within a common labour market. It can also be that regions are connected through production as well, through supply chains. But there needs to be some kind of, I guess, economic logic there for the territories that we look at. It doesn't mean that we can't look at cross-border issues, because sometimes functional economic areas cut across different municipalities, different provinces, and even countries. And these administrative boundaries generate anomalies and barriers in terms of how economies work. So I think we have to be flexible about scale, but recognise it is related to the function of an economy. That's a starting point. Second was there's generally this focus on indigenous businesses and entrepreneurship. Again, about supporting traditional livelihoods and participation in value chains. But I think the point that Christopher raised about not imposing a particular view about what entrepreneurship might be, but I think it is important for again, our starting point is a community, a collective, has a vision for development, and that you need to be able to enable different choices about business, which helps communities deliver on that vision. And that can be communal forms of entrepreneurship or individual entrepreneurship. And then when we talked about the things which help businesses grow and innovate, it's about access to finance and access to human capital and the regulatory environment as well. And then the second common theme was around governance. So how, again, that capacity to participate, to manage in the development process, importance of having good information, good data, and how organisational bodies representing indigenous communities integrate with other governance bodies, municipalities, regional and national governments as well. And then today, what we can do is, again, we'll do present some information on the project methods and discuss that with you. We've developed a proposal for how the project is implemented into time and so forth. And then we were going to engage in development director right now, but so it's the first two things which are critical today. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or observations about that before it's all.
One of the things that is really great about the countries participating right now is the variety of differences that we have. So I think it's really helpful with the project because we do have countries with one indigenous group, others with hundreds. We're going to learn something really interesting from the process because of the diversity of the different types of indigenous groups around the world. It's not the same. Sometimes people think indigenous people are the same. There's a lot of commonalities that we share, but it's really interesting for us to see also how in the different lands on this globe, indigenous people are establishing interesting different languages and cultures within one country. So it's very important for the study to have the leaders of the final report understand that. So the challenges are different. On the other thing, we talked about the integration of indigenous governments with the local townships, municipalities, and regions. I think it's what I would like to see this report do, because I've seen it firsthand, is to let these townships, municipalities, provinces, countries know the value of, understand the value of including indigenous people in economic development and on a larger scale. Sometimes people don't really understand. We talk about the economic leakage from the First Nation communities and how much money is spent in a region, in a indigenous community or cluster of indigenous communities advance economically, and how much it impacts positively on the regional economy, the local, municipal, and township economies really a benefit as well. I think it's not so much the integration, it's showing the value that indigenous people bring when they do well, the whole community as well, and in the end, the whole country as well. Thank you.
Just can you go back to one slide? This one thing that especially that came up a lot, but it's sort of more on the economic side. It's the data and indicators, how that will be addressed in their commonality or lack of data, and in terms of what the success actually speaks that we can
to that point, and perhaps to the connection with this last comment, prevention, I think that since we're facing this data challenge, and one objective that we have is to go beyond that while we're still working with working on this issue. Perhaps lying in the analytical part of the report to make a portrait not only with the reality is and what we know now, and knowing that it's quite important, but with the potential and the economic profile it could be. It leads to Don's point we look at the value and the potential, the economic contribution that the communities could make. This is a study about economic development, so I would very much want it to stay on that topic. And we have looked at some on a variety of issues that we've mentioned, but if we want the report to have the impact that the voted will be doing, like to have an economic demonstration of the potential. Then you conclude that there is value and inclusion, finding ways, but having that signal in the analytical part of the report, I think would be a good way of putting them in.
Just concerning the data collection, ownership of data is important, and it will be going to be important to involve First Nation organization collecting these data. For our organization, it's already hard to have non-registered business to give us some support and numbers, so having the government to ask for these numbers is going to be really hard. So if we can find a way to collaborate and share the data, I think it can go forward positively.
So I think, I mean, they are all good points. I mean, I think in terms of the differences and diversity and variety, I think that, I mean, although I did focus on commonalities, and that's partly to try and build some cohesion amongst the group, but certainly in terms of our place-based approach, you know, that's at the heart of it. You know, to say that in terms of looking at a point of view from government, the government cannot treat every community or territory the same. It needs to look at those differences and adapt policies based on those differences. And then, I mean, another thing which is at the heart of this project is understanding the value that Indigenous communities bring to the development. And I think that really, yeah, is at the heart of the project. So I think that is something that we're focusing on. In terms of the data, yeah, and that was a big point on day one as well, and that's something that we acknowledge is a challenge, and we have to look at innovative ways of overcoming that. And also through the project is provide some recommendations about how to address this problem long term as well, which is very important. And then, you know, for now, case study approach, the focus will be on a diagnosis of that economy and what its potential is and how to realise that potential. So that's something that there's a logic that we use in our case study approach.
Just one more comment. It's probably not very helpful, but looking forward in terms of sort of the next steps on what kind of policy recommendations can I make. One of the significant preoccupations in our department is the deferred costs aspect of what does, and I'm not asking the studies about, what does effective economic development do in terms of not costing other areas? So what it be? Yeah, what is that? So I know that's not what this analysis is supposed to do, but the acknowledgement somewhere that how the economic things get to the different ones.
No, sorry, there's a lot of academic literature on that. Something we haven't talked too much about. But, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's part of the case for investing in economic development. It's also, I mean, you see that it's off topic again. I mean, that's why you see that in business cases for health prevention. There's invested in health prevention initiatives, and people don't go to hospital or so forth. But yeah, so that's something I've thought about.
That could also be, I mean, that could be the largest today and his vision, you know, and the approach that is implemented in Australia, which is to start at the job. We know that when there is in the diagnostic, they make connections to whole variety of issues, housing, so on and so forth, education, everything, not only that, but by actually making that argument about what we call, I think when I was working with, we call it social returns, yeah, what you're not saving. Actually, it gives us the opportunity to say what other issues and needs would get addressed by doing this and not the other way around. Because we don't have availability, because right now healthcare is, but looking at it from the economy perspective and then highlighting that it would also generate benefits with regards to the other dimension, socioeconomic life in the community would be another angle which we mentioned that, but it's not, you know. I thought that also the study could allow us, because it's such a horizontal approach that we're trying to put in place here. When we look at the case studies, I think it was that it would be important every time we go somewhere that we ask the actors that we talk to what kind of flexibility in terms of policy or program or criteria when we deal with a financial institution, any kind of partner, they either benefited from or would have required to find success. I think that is another way to inform the policy and program development. So if they have success, what kind of flexibility, program-wise, policy-wise, with the necessary help, or allow them to go one step further. Maybe they did something interesting, but their vision was some kind of say or policy roadblock. And how can we circumvent? Because we're not going to resolve all the other issues that we mentioned between now in our respective countries between now and 2019. Well, how can we go about? How can economic development happen? Knowing that. So that's what I need to look at it from subgroups, subsectors, populations, and also the rural and urban that allow us to probably inform policy and program development. Finally, that would be a simulation for points to that. They're only talking to you about logistical issues. The dissemination. I saw the word communication up there. I don't know if we're speaking about the same thing, so just to make sure. For me, since we are putting in place a new approach, a new way of doing it, I would like that some serious thinking be done at the beginning of the project about how we want to disseminate this report, to whom, to achieve what. Because I think that would have that could actually have an impact on the design of the study and its methodology. If we, I think, like this project is a bit different from our usual, the report that we produce, the dissemination and the work we do with the report should also be different. So, who are we trying to influence? Who are we going to talk to when we release it? And when we think of a model of design for that, the consideration of the district, economic development leaders, communities around the table should be at the forefront of that strategy as well.
thanks for that. I think, can we swap over the presentations to the project scoping one that I was using yesterday? But I mean, the flexibility, and that can be an issue within programs, within or certain regulatory frameworks, but it's also about the interface between different programs, policy areas as well. So I think we make this also, particularly the interface between infrastructure and land use or interface between employment and skills. Interface between employment and skills. So, and that, I guess, the benefit is if you look at it, you start with a place, you look at those things, because you're looking at it from the point of view of the place, and places don't, places aren't people. You're looking at it from the point of view of why places don't care about necessarily sectors or industry. So yeah, that's something that's sort of built into how we work, and the communications. We put together some initial thoughts on that. So part of it's the testing today, and get thoughts on that. So let's run through the presentation. Okay. So in terms of the method, so what I wanted to do is just to give you an overview of the different ways that you can collect information, and also engage with groups, stakeholders in the report as well. So I'll just run through it quickly, and I might get also Anna might chip in on the side as well, and then we can have a discussion about that, and then we'll have a play. So in terms of, I guess, as sort of an overview, there are a number of sources of information and data for us. The first is looking at the current state knowledge stuff around those questions. So we've already started to do that. So it's all questions that we decide, and we'll do that to use that a bit, but enable us to then have a better idea about the sorts of propositions that are working. Now, in terms of the data collection, the first is a range of qualitative data sources. One is a survey to national governments in this case to collect their assessment, self-assessment of policy, government settings, and some information on data sources as well. What we propose also is in terms of the communities that we take, there's also some surveys there that they're used on top of that survey. Then, in terms of the other method is some missions that we conduct. And on these missions, we meet with people, discuss policy issues with them. We hold workshops, knowledge activities as well, and some notes and observations from them. And then we will also collect policy documents, reports. Now, what we'll do is analyse all that information in relation to the propositions that we're developing in the first place. So look at common themes, differences across those different data sources and use those to that story. The second part is in the quantitative data that we've discussed presentations around those, and that's socio-economic data, so about business, labour, about demography as well, and whatever territorial level get that provided. Data about user brand as well, and data about public investment, structural services as well. Come from statistical agencies, but also so the literature review, as I said, relates to those things we've been talking about around climate and economic development. There's a range of different sources for that. There's the academic literature, there's critical grade or grade literature from those consultancies, bodies like the one which Norm represents. Then reports by other international organisations that have been active in the space, and then relevant inquiries and reports that have been undertaken that are relevant. So that's important for us to identify what those in terms of the survey will be designed in a way which reflects the framework that we use in this project. So it's those four chapters which I presented yesterday, and then also specific sub-themes studies. In terms of indicators, there'll be a lot of data online that we research ourselves, but we need to understand some of the issues that data. I think Canada has some expertise in that, but also Canada, important to engage in. And then perhaps there'll be also sources which are not available publicly, like sources we want to look at access to public infrastructure and services like land, so then data around so the survey will ask questions about land use, around the policy and institutional framework. The last question which asking policy makers to self-evaluate as well. So, so forth. And similarly on the theme of business development, again, it's their views around strengths, potential, bottlenecks, and the self-assessment of the policy framework. And then questions related to leadership, capacity, and governance. Now we have an instrument which is called the Principles for Public Investment Across Levels of Government, which OECD countries adhere to, and countries which are seeking accession to the OECD need to adhere to as well. And it is based around a number of elements. So it looks at mechanisms for coordination between levels of government. It looks at competencies, whether the right competencies are at a local and regional level to deliver on regional development policies as well. And so there are a number of indicators that were developed in relation to that. So we would like to assess countries' Indigenous economic development policies using that instrument in the survey. And then each country will want us to focus on specific sub-themes, which are linked to the case study, and so we have tailored questions around that as well. So once we send this survey, we would expect, probably at least a couple of months for you to fill that out, because probably going to require some coordination with other agencies as well. And this is a normal practice that we use in our reports. The second is then a survey that we would send to the Indigenous communities participating in this study, and there would be a number of different elements to that. First is basically asking them to define what their economy is. That's a good starting point. And then any information that they can provide about the local demographic, economic profile of their community, any major changes which have occurred in that community over the last decade, their vision, the sort of SWOT analysis, what their threats, opportunities, strengths and weaknesses are, and their views about the effectiveness of different policies and programs related to economic development, and what sort of changes that they would make if they had a chance. And so this is something that we don't normally do, because normally the survey just goes to government. But I think we also need to get an independent view from the community as well, that we can feed into this process. Now, there are issues here around, again, obviously any community participating in the study needs to give their consent to be participating in the study, and we need to understand their capacity to engage, and therefore what would be the best method for collecting this information. Would it be something that we send to them that they can fill out? Is it something that we talk to them over the phone on a number of different occasions? So I think that the important thing is that we get that independent view that we can feed into the process. And then the other and this really depends on, again, how much, in a practical sense, how many financial contributions we get to the project, which would enable us to do something which we are very interested in, which is understanding the informal governance arrangements in communities. So we did this work, we did some work on this in Australia when I was with the state government of Victoria, and we would get someone who was trusted or known or a member of the community to interview some of the community leaders about their governance relationships. So where they get strategic information from, who they talk to, what are the quality of relationships between different actors involved in the governance of the community, and its linkages with municipalities and regions as well. It's very hard to get information about that. I mean, you can sit down and talk to people and say, yes, we have a good relationship with someone here and someone there, but if you do that in a structured way, actually asking people about the quality of their relationships and getting them to rank them, you can begin to build a bit of a network map. So, for example, that can show you one thing is, whether the governance of the community is strongly linked to the municipality, or is it strongly linked to the Regional Economic Development Agency, is it strongly linked to the province. So it will give you a bit of an understanding, sort of a network map about how decision making works in that community. And again, it depends on consent, depends on capacity, and it depends on whether we have the financial resources to do that, because then you pay someone to actually do the interviews, again, who is a member and who is trusted within that community. And then in terms of the quantitative data, as I said, there are a range of sources there and different analytical techniques. I might get Anna just to briefly talk about that.
Thank you, Chris. Just two short comments before I get to specific data sources and analytical techniques. The first one is that we have the idea of looking at indigenous economies as embedded in local economies, regional economies. So we're not going to be only understanding indigenous economies, but also the wider context. So we're also going to draw on data on the regional system. So in the end, we have policies that work for both. So how to identify it also from the other side, how to better integrate with the existing local surrounding economy. So that's one thing. So we have extra sources also for the surrounding economy. The second thing is that we're going to obviously talk about the existing gaps in statistics that there are compared to standard analysis. So the fact, for instance, that we don't have much information about firms or economic activity as such that help us identify potential. But we're going to also try to move beyond this standard analysis to include things that are not usually included in this type of analysis. For instance, measuring important factors for indigenous economies, such as social capital, traditional knowledge, cultural capital. So these are things that have huge potential, but are usually disregarded because maybe people think they're difficult to be measured, or that they don't matter so much. But actually, these things in the discourse, parts of the literature started recognizing that these are very important things. And this, the kind of potential that has been disregarded in analysis that focus so much on gaps in basic things like education and health, which is fine, but also we have to focus on how to measure those potential factors that are active indigenous economies. So in line with what Marie-Chantal said, of course, it would be great if we could do that during this project, but that's of course very ambitious. I'm young, and eager, but also human. So I think there will be a limit to that. We will include some dimension, for instance, trying to include the discourse of social networks on the mix, trying to understand these networks, trying to see how they add to these economic indigenous economies and their potential. To suggest better ways to measure this, look into the future. So how these networks might help indigenous economies better integrate with their local and regional economies. So in terms of what we are actually going to use is what we will have at hand. We will be very creative and very flexible, and we hope to get all your inputs, because so far I've been working what it is publicly available, which is not much, but basically we go to the basic micro data and look for categories of self-identification as indigenous and try to get cross tabulations of important variables out of that. Everything that census microdata can give us. The problem, as I said the first day, is that in some countries censuses are outdated. It is the most comprehensive source, but it doesn't occur very often. So we also rely on other type of sources like labor force surveys and the sort to look at dimensions of demography, human capital, economic participation, etc. Everything that will help us paint the picture of indigenous economies. Then we also look at other types of capital besides human capital, such as that related to natural capital and land use. And here, hopefully, the data will be better because this is usually collected in a way that doesn't depend so much on surveys. We're going to draw as much as we can on that to understand the economic potential of the lands where indigenous people have economies. We're also going to, of course, draw on these non-pecuniary factors that I talked about, if not measuring them, trying to think about ways in the future how we can measure these things and integrate them with existing measures of economic and regional development. And I think in the way that is the ultimate goal to also make these measures more inclusive, to acknowledge also those type of capitals, that would be a win-win for everybody, I think, broadening those dimensions. And then finally, as our sources, we will have information on public investment in infrastructure and services, which hopefully will give us an idea of provision gaps and these sort of things. On the analytical techniques, we'll also draw from our full battery of techniques, any technique that is relevant to analyzing this data and presenting it in the best way possible to convey our message. This including, of course, comparison when they're appropriate, acknowledging of course, the limitations in the data of statistical problems underlying the data whenever we can draw these comparisons, or highlighting the problems on the underlying data to be solved in the future. We will have a part on accessibility measures, which I think are very important for remote regions, understanding accessibility potential in terms of, so for instance, market of public services. And we will, in the end, try to get to that indicator that is the ultimate goal, that it will be our key policy message, as Maggie Chantal commented on, to say, okay, we have a number and say, if you really took seriously these indigenous economies and really integrated them in your regional plans, you will have this much gain. So hopefully we will come to either a way to measure that so that it makes sense for everybody, or just to give an idea of what would a measure like that look in the future. And lastly, if necessary, we will try to analyze different variables in using techniques that help us understand some of the impediments and some of the opportunities from the socioeconomic variables that we collect, including also, if possible, connected to what Chris was saying, the network mapping and analysis, which we think is an important dimension of something that is usually not quantified, but very important for indigenous economies. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. So I might leave it there before we move on to the mission and communication. So that was an overview about how we're thinking about the collection of data and information to help us, again, deliver policy recommendations which are robust and supported by evidence. So again, the floor is everyone's to question us, to seek clarification, and also suggest any ideas that will help us improve how we conduct this work.
I just have one comment on the qualitative, on the survey idea. Keeping in mind, and I'd like Don's view and the view of the other Indigenous leaders. Indigenous communities in Canada are poked and prodded and surveyed and asked to report on a massive amount of stuff on a daily basis. So figuring out how that can be done in a way that is as labor unintensive and as helpful to the communities is obviously key. The other thing on the on the quantitative one, I wasn't sure there was one, and maybe you can go back to this one bullet, but I didn't understand what development of accessibility measures means.
So I come from, before I was doing transport studies, there is where you use the concept of how many opportunities can you reach within a certain amount of travel. So like if you travel half an hour by car, how many people will you reach, how many markets, how many services, how many hospitals, how many schools. And this is very big now in the transport literature because it gives you an idea of inequalities in service provision that is very clear. So you say if someone in a community drives for 2 hours and cannot find a school, whereas in other parts they will find 100 schools, then that is something that needs to be addressed. So in a way, these measures are developed with data that is usually publicly available from sources like OpenStreetMaps. And we also can use transportation data that is publicly available. So are measures that are being currently used because they rely on data that has become recently available for people. And from them, usually the idea is to give an idea of the inequality in access, to give an idea of a better idea of remoteness.
And how does access to broadband fit into that?
Yeah, then it's a complement. It is a complement. This is really physical access. So if people have to physically get to get an idea of, I think it's very relevant of what we were talking about in Colombia, for instance. If they want to develop markets, the first thing is to say, how many days does it take for them to actually get their goods? So we will complement, of course, in remote areas, we always work with both dimensions of physical access and also alternatives such as broadband connection to this. So, yes.
This data is really great because it also accounts for the quality of the roads, and that differs in different parts of the country. So it's not just, you're not drawing boundaries around assets to try and understand distance. You're actually taking into account how long it actually takes to travel.
Just on the comment as to really engage on the Aboriginal side, I think that's I know that for me, I would like to go back to my board of directors with the National Aboriginal Economic Development Board and get recommendations from them. We do engagements, I think, or been involved in engagements, and so I think there would be some really good suggestions probably put forward from that group, because we do have economic organizations that also work with the communities, and most of the time these organizations are headed up by people who have worked in the communities for long periods of time. I think of, for example, the Ontario First Nation Economic Developers Association was worked in the community as an EDO for many years. Same with the head of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. They've worked in the community. So I think we wouldn't be leaving the community perspective behind and working with some of the individuals. But I would really like to go back to my board of directors from across the country who work with their communities and work in their communities to get some perspective on some ideas. Because we could probably come up with a list of groups or individuals that need to be, communities that need to be part of this in terms of survey. And I think one of the things I thought the survey was quite a bit different for the Indigenous people as to the government survey. And so I think that at first I didn't realize we were going to do the Indigenous one, and I was thinking, well, we could answer those questions too, some of the government survey questions that you had. So I think you should be looking at maybe meshing those a little bit. So,
yeah, I mean, this one here, you know, if there are institutions like yours in countries, I think it would, yes, if everyone's open to that, then that would be a good thing, because I think it's just if you can get more sources of evidence, it just adds to the quality of the analysis that you're able to produce. So I think for sure, if there is capacity to do that, I mean, we could even think about a survey design for for peak organisations, you know, for peak organisations that have, for Indigenous people that have an expertise in economic development and tailor a survey for that, because you're going to get different, you will get different views, and that's a healthy thing. Yeah.
Also in the line of the service that Christopher says is the same in Peru. It's just people are tired of service and we have to be very careful, but also because of the expectation. The results, the time of the survey and the results of the project are going to be very long. And probably there are not going to be recommendations that in the case of Peru, the community will receive and understand and can implement. So the benefit of the survey, we have to manage this expectation. I think in Peru we have to think a little bit more, but I'm just thinking that maybe we can link it to ongoing projects, so the survey is not a specific, the mission doesn't go just for this, but together with other government interventions. We have workshops all the time, so maybe we can include some issues and start to give information. That's one thing, and the other is also something that Christopher mentioned yesterday about we are going to look at. Of course, we are going to look at the community, collective economy, the whole community, but because you're also talking about entrepreneurs, and we will see for a lot of individuals making business for the necessary change, sharing with the whole community. I have seen, for instance, even some indigenous people using their knowledge, the collective knowledge, but modifying things and innovate in knowledge. And when that is okay with the community, you have individual and collective rights inside. So I imagine it's going to be a challenge to look at both, but also it's going to be difficult to get that information if you want to. So because that's an individual issues. Going to ask a person about how they do these things, maybe that would get thinking loud voice, but that probably would be difficult to get information about. So I think it's something to look at when you decide how far you give in that analysis in each community will go. And this also takes me to the criteria for the case study. Of course, there are differences in each country, but I imagine that for the objective of the whole project, we should identify criteria that help all of them. I just start thinking about some criteria from Peru, but maybe there's something that I don't know if we are going to do here or later, but I think it's important to choose it very well, the criteria to choose, to be able to choose well the case studies, so they are really useful for us, what we want to get.
Good morning. This was a very interesting subject, and if we value, or if we estimate, or we find the data for the profit that indigenous entrepreneurs makes annually, it could be have some special interest if we also got to know what does the big companies make for profit in the same area in extracting natural resources. The demand for huge company is always to increase the profit and limit the expenditures. That means that in some cases, at least, the company have the personnel that lives in other areas than in the municipality where the extraction of the natural resource takes place. So they fly in, they fly out, and the workers pay taxes in the municipality where they live, and sometimes it's far away. It must be of much higher value to have, for instance, indigenous entrepreneurs who live in the municipality who valuable contribute with tax paying, with consuming, with offering services and experiences in the municipality where they live. And then you have numbers that you can put in relation to each other. For instance, companies numbers, data, and compared with indigenous entrepreneurs, I would not be surprised if it showed in the end that the gain of having a huge company with the demands of increasing profit and reducing their expenditures is not beneficiary to the community, because just extracting a natural resource without refining it, without making the most of that natural resources, so it gets a much higher value, instead of sending it to a different location where this process takes place. And this kind of sending raw material from municipalities and to other regions in the country is non-productive as far as I can see. If your goal are that the whole country there shall live and increase in population. And the first day I mentioned the numbers of the inhabitants in northernmost country in Sweden, that has gone down to 18,000 inhabitants from 1995 to 2012, and of course it's not possible to just rely on those numbers, but still that is what the headlines are saying in the newspapers. This increased demands for efficiency, increased efficiency among the companies, and it would be very interesting to see if similar demands for increased efficiency will occur among the indigenous entrepreneurs. Thank you. Thank you.
A mí me preocupa mucho la entrevista que está planteando con organizaciones comunitarias, y vuelvo como a enredarme con el concepto de organización. Yo entiendo que este es un estudio a nivel nacional donde se va a tratar de identificar no solo cuál está haciendo el aporte, sino el potencial de aporte de las economías indígenas a esa gran economía nacional o regional o local. Pero cuando ustedes plantean esas entrevistas con organizaciones indígenas, parten como de unos supuestos que para el caso colombiano a mí me cuesta como trabajo creer que es posible. Sí, primero porque las organizaciones, y lo voy a decir con todo respeto porque, o sea, no me puedo tomar la palabra de las organizaciones, pero hasta donde yo conozco, digamos, en su construcción todavía no hay una postura muy clara frente al desarrollo económico. En organizaciones, digamos, de instancias nacionales, lo que uno ve en esos espacios son otras discusiones de carácter político, pero no mucho sobre desarrollo económico. Segundo, porque la diversidad en Colombia es tan alta que uno no puede pensar que una o dos otras organizaciones puedan dar cuenta de una realidad tan diversa. Entonces, a mí sí me gustaría, digamos, que como que ese instrumento lo miráramos más en detalle para saber cómo se puede ajustar a ser pertinente para obtener información que sea adecuada para el estudio. Porque si no nos vamos a tener unas generalidades, pues que tampoco son consonantes con la realidad de la gente, sus comunidades, sus territorios. Unas expectativas de desarrollo pues, que pasan desde estar inmersos en el conflicto armado, a tener energía ilegal, a bueno, una cantidad de circunstancias que hacen que la vida sea jodidita, digamos, en buen colombiano, ¿no? Entonces, sí, creo que esto hay que mirarlo con más sensibilidad, digamos, frente a la especificidad de la realidad colombiana.
Okay, so I'll just address them in turn. So, in terms of what Flavia said, I think if you come back to the point about the survey, it's really to ensure that that communities have a voice, you know, and get their view, an independent view, so then it's a question how you do that, and so. You know, and the question of capacity. And I'll talk about emissions as well, because that's another way of getting that voice as well. But certainly, if there are other engagement exercises going on that we can build upon, then that's a good thing. You know, I mean, I've worked in community development. I understand fatigue, engagement fatigue, and that's something that we want to avoid. The point about individual entrepreneurs or businesses, again, that's something we can do on mission. If business people are comfortable, so often on mission we go and talk to individual business owners about their business and what has helped them be successful and what sort of changes would they like to see in terms of policy. So it's something we can do on mission. So we can, I'll talk about that in a minute. I think in terms of the case study criteria, that's very important. And we did talk about that yesterday, and I think this idea of communities, groups of communities that have made a transition, have made some progress is one criteria. The ones which are located in a rural economy is another. And then there's the capacity to engage and participate and consent as well, which would be the other criteria. In terms of Stefan, I think it's very important, this discussion we had about the value chain and what kind of value are you capturing and generating within a community, and how to help communities capture more value. And perhaps also the company level data is one area that we can investigate in Sweden. It might actually be quite, because Sweden does have very good quality firm level data, potentially we could draw upon. And again, Maria Teresa is really, I understand there's different contexts in this study in different countries. So it's more, again, how do you get the voice of Indigenous communities in this project? And if that instrument is not the appropriate one for Colombia, then perhaps it's more on the missions to get that voice. So that's something that we need to clarify in terms of how we implement the project in Colombia. Now, the other, so that was the data, unless there's any more comments. The other, so I'll talk about the missions and the communications. So the OECD missions are very important in terms of the process of our work, because it allows us to observe and interact with policymakers, industry leaders, NGOs, people from different levels of government. So for us, it's very educative, to have that experience. It's also about bringing in the peer reviewers. So peer reviewers are another source of evidence for us. So these are people from the participating countries who go on missions to other countries. So I think, Dawn, we were talking about that last night. So if someone like you came to another country, it's about you with your expertise reviewing that country as an expert, and also transferring your knowledge and expertise. And so Marie Chantal was a peer reviewer on our Northern Sparsely Populated Areas report to Sweden. And I know the Swedes gained a lot out of that, and I think also, I would say you also gained from that experience. So it's about this transfer of knowledge between countries, which is central to how the OECD works. So we have a mission team, which is made up, in this case, of OECD staff, peer reviewers, Indigenous leaders from participating countries, local experts if countries want to bring them in. And we have these two main techniques. So one is we have conversations with people around particular topics. So in fact, I think one of the great conversations we had on that mission was with the Sami Parliament in Sweden. We had the opportunity to talk with them and hear their views firsthand, get an unfiltered view, from different stakeholders, and that enables us to build up a view about what's going on, because we're not just hearing just one point of view. And it's important for us to engage with a broad range of stakeholders as well, from different sectors. That can be, in terms of the private sector, it can be representative organisations, chambers of commerce, but it can also be individual businesses as well. And I think you get a lot of value from that engagement with individual businesses. And they also can be become things that you highlight in the report as well as good as practices or case studies. And then in this review is directly engaging with Indigenous leaders in their community. It's again, to get their voice and get their views. And we need to work through each country to, in terms of how each country wants to set up that engagement and who we can engage with. And then we also need to understand any sort of ethical dimensions to that and any cultural and language issues related in that engagement as well. So I might just leave it there with the missions, but so Warren, we just talked through the methods this morning, and I'll plug your book as well. And,
At a very reasonable price.
So everyone's aware of that now, and so we talked through the different sources of data that we want to draw on in this project. Data, census data from government about public investment. We talked about the surveys that we will send to governments to get their views around strengths and weaknesses and around a policy framework for economic development. And also directly engaging with Indigenous communities that will be involved in the study as well. And now I was just talking through the missions that we will conduct to each country. So I'll just leave it there again and leave it open for people to comment on that. If you have any questions.
I've been struggling with my references comment for the last 3 years. And I don't want to be a disruptor.
Yes.
But perhaps it's your job, right? So please support my comment. No, but just a thought. To me, the issue that my interference raised is not just a Colombian reality. And I'm wondering if we're investing the right amount of time and effort at the right place by doing such a robust analytical, quantitative, part at the beginning. I know it's part of the OECD process. I read enough OECD reports to master the methodology and the approach. And it is a robust one. I'm not disputing that at all. This is a different project. I think we're facing different realities, and I'm not sure. I'm just saying about that front part. Case studies, who we need to meet, who we need to discuss, absolutely. And I'm wondering if some of the objectives that we usually, and the work that we usually do in the prep, analytical part of the work before going on missions should be more integrated in the on-site information gathering and talk more about information than data when we're looking at this issue. I know I'm kind of throwing something out there now, but I'm, even for Canada, I'm not sure it's going to be so beneficial to have that service. I'm just putting the question out.
I think it's a legitimate, of course, it's a legitimate question. I guess it's who is this report trying to influence? And if you are obviously it's trying to influence and work with a whole range of stakeholders, but for us, when we do our reports, we're really trying to influence the Ministry of Finance, the central agencies, and to do that, you need good data. You need something which is robust. And if we go through a process and say we don't have the data to be robust, then that's a problem that needs to be addressed.
Is it gonna be with that approach?
Do you think it will be credible? Well, that's our intent. But I mean, what we again, if you go back to first principles, we're trying to develop good policy recommendations, and to do that, we have a range of sources of information that we're drawing on. One of those sources is data, is quantitative data, and then the other sources are documents, analysis. Other source is engagement with policymakers, and then the other source is engagement with communities and their knowledge. So that's.
I know how important it is to try to, for Indigenous people, we want to have, like I said, all throughout this, to make informed decisions, to be involved in everything like that. But I think when I looked at this project, I think what we were looking at is digging deep into the actual case studies. That's where we're going to be getting most of the data. But it's not, we can't do everything for all projects or the ones that haven't been doing well, the ones that are, the ones that have failed. Because we can always learn. There's so many things we can learn from, but we really have to be careful in picking and choosing the projects that we can learn from, that have had an impact. And I think that's where we get into the detail. I think that's going to be the most important thing. But it's trying to figure out which of those projects are the ones that each of the countries want to work with. Is this to really analyze it and take it apart and find out what made it work? What were the supports? How can we replicate something like this? What were the benefits? What were the impacts of this? And I think that's where the detail in this project is going to come from. I was looking at the idea of the surveys, and I think that general input is going to be helpful, but really where the detail is going to happen is when we get into the case studies. Because we can't solve everything. I think we can just look at areas where we think there might be lessons to be learned and leading practices, and that's what we need to focus on in this kind of a study for now. I think that this is really one of the OECD's first Indigenous projects, and so I think that it might be the start of others going forward to look at other areas that we can maybe build on. But I think for now, it's somewhere what I can see, resources will be limited right now and going forward. But with what we have, I don't want that to say that that's going to limit us. I think we should go with the best project possible. And to me, when I looked at this project, I thought that let's try to make sure that we put forward some good case studies. I'd rather focus our efforts and our resources on good case studies for the project rather than trying to solve all the problems out there, because we still have a lot to work on. And but it'll open doors, it'll open eyes to the potential and the possibilities. I think by having a really good, solid project report at the end of this that can help affect change.
Okay. I would think, just listening to this, that there's I agree on the case study side, there is perhaps a happy medium just to go perhaps understand contextually what is going on in the countries, but go lighter on that side and spend more time on case studies. But in response to Marie Therese's, this whole thing, I think, in whichever country, has to be very clearly communicated and articulated what the potential benefits at the community level of gaining better understanding of the critical success factors that contributed to successful projects in each country are, and then what the benefits are of understanding critical success factors from other case studies. I'm sort of assuming that in working with Dawn and others, we are going to be able to find communities or groups of communities who really want to participate in that for that reason. That may be an assumption that is, gets tested if there are cases where you actually can convey the benefits of this to a series of communities, and we have a problem. Then it just seems like people from the outside stepping to something that doesn't necessarily have benefits
if I can add, we did that send more strategy of engagement activities, and we did have surveys, and one survey, one online survey, and roundtables. And when we approached indigenous communities, we didn't have very good answer for the surveys, either online, either by post. We sent them a post. So they were more willing to participate actively in the roundtables and to meet us personally than to send the surveys. And I did the same thing in us. So it might be also possible.
Yeah, so also just add, and I do apologise on this the first part, but the you are dealing with indigenous people, so it's you need to do things a little bit different. What we're a bit slow in Australia. It's taken us 40 years to work on this. That we discovered that just through arts and digital things, surveys, and other things, doesn't really work. Also, when you're working with a group of people who have a different approach to commercial economic issues, then you have to also have a different approach to working with those groups of people. And so, and also in the Australian context, what we found that it was more of a personal approach, a relationship approach, where people could trust you and work with you and actually then give you the views that they wanted, what they saw within the development of their organisations, their communities, and how they can move forward. The other thing was that is also you learn a lot. I know this in business as well. You learn a lot more from failures than you actually do from successes, and you understand why you understand the problems that are there and what you weren't listening to, and that's what you learn from that, and you do things forward. So when you're doing some of these things, looking for best practice in that, it's better to listen and to actually, and I call it listening with eyes as well, so observing, and then from that you can develop, work with, well, you work with people. You don't actually sit up here and make decisions up here. I also understand that the OECD is working with governments, and you know, I'm only 26, and what the government's done to me set me grey. So it's very, you know, you have to be able to provide information. If we are correct, Chris, that you have to provide information that and back that up to get governments over the line in these areas. So you've got to play this two ball game approach.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to make an intervention. And it is correct that you jeopardize to make a failure if you are part of a project that you don't enjoy so much. All the questions and all the goals or the requisita for the project itself. And I have experienced myself that involving non-indigenous in various projects might be a little bit dangerous, or one have to be a little bit cautious. Have to have some caution in involving non-indigenous. But on the other hand, this project idea is bringing together several indigenous peoples, First Nations, people from the Andes, and also from Aboriginals from Australia. And can you imagine, I heard the news during the rainy summer in Sweden that they had found the remains that Aboriginals have been walking on the plains of Australia for more than 60,000 years. And seen in that context, okay, a country wrote the constitution 150 years ago. Okay, they have walked at the president's palace in Finland celebrating 100 years. Okay, not so much to celebrate. Indigenous people are defending the nature, and of course they are people, they are not populations. Without an army, without a police force, So this is beneficiary to the project, and I believe that we have to jeopardize to make failure in order to maybe achieve something that are valuable. And that's got strong orders from home base to say this. Thank you.
So in terms of that, I mean, we can develop something which doesn't include a survey to communities. You know, and that's fine. I think that the intent it's more the intent behind the survey, which is to try and get their voice in the process, and perhaps that's more something which can happen on a mission when we meet with people and talk to them, and then perhaps if there's things that we want to follow up with people about and they're comfortable with that, we can follow that up with them, either probably over the phone or through email exchange. And then the points about the survey again is that perhaps it would be better to send a shorter or more tailored survey to in countries if these institutions exist that can give a view on behalf of Indigenous people. So maybe something that we can send to the Sami Parliament or something to your board as well, along the lines of the country survey. Again, it's about collecting as much evidence that we can from different sources to develop robust conclusions. In terms of the case studies, I agree that case studies are very important. The risk is with just case studies is that you tell a lot of good stories which don't add up to anything. And so you need to be able to draw some generalisations which are supported by data, which can be influential in making governments do policy changes, to have that business case for policy change. So I think we just acknowledge that, and we just need to be mindful of how we balance that through the process. Now, if there's are there any more comments? Yes,
In order for clarification, so I'm very positive that the Sami Parliament gets a survey sent to itself. We have been part of the process earlier, and I was not present, but it doesn't matter. We want to be part of the process since we have been participating. And we're also very grateful that the Swedish government submitted funding for this project, participating in this project, and after all, it is involving Indigenous peoples, and instead of involving stupid or maybe not so good topics like investigation how the predators are feeling when they are slaughtering in a grazing reindeer herd, which sometimes have been the topic. We already know that due to our traditional knowledge and experience in reindeer husbandry for hundreds of years. But this is new to us, and it's also new experience to cooperate with Indigenous peoples with totally different background and totally different opportunities, but we will try to do our best. Thank you.
And I would just like to clarify that I don't think it's, what I was proposing is that I would speak to my board who represent regions across the country to get their advice on the best way to get data from our communities and regions. And I would like to definitely get their feedback on this, and that's something that I'll definitely be sending an email out to them after this to get their advice, and then we'll probably convene a call and talk about it and get back to you. It's what we feel is the best approach, at least from Canada, but I think that it's going to be important to, I like the idea of the round tables. If we can do something here in Canada, I think that those work, and then people who want to have some input on the topic, they come in. But we've done that here in Canada before, and it seems to have brought together some good advice from people who wanted to speak to whatever the topic was. So we would probably look at maybe something. But I want to check with my board first and get their advice on it.
Yeah, I just want to follow up too in regard to some of the comments that we're in Australia, we're very committed to this process of and also domestically as well as internationally, because we're very strong in regard to looking at and promoting and pushing the idea of having an Indigenous economic ground within APEC and ABEC processes. And we want to work really hard on that so that there's an Indigenous voice at those larger economic gatherings and input. And also we know from our own experience that we've been trying for 40 years, we've fallen into the trap, I'm talking generally here, of the Australian government, fallen into the trap of what is good for Europeans in a sense, and that is not necessarily good for Indigenous groups. We know the failings in those areas, and so we're very committed to about how to improve our processes and how the government focuses in this area, how the government's set up work with Indigenous groups to make sure, and also have them at the leadership of it. So, yeah.
So I think from that, there's a recognition that we need to, that Indigenous people, Indigenous communities need to have a voice in this project, but the way in which that voice is expressed will be dependent on advice from Indigenous leaders and national governments within that country. But recognising that we're doing a project which needs to get that voice in. So,
You should have been a bit
So in terms of communication and engagement, which Marie Chantal was alluding to, and I think this is something that I'm not very good at, and which we'll need advice about. So the first is that to set up a web page.
We wanted to suggest maybe we could take the break.
Oh, sure,
and
yeah.
keep
Yep.
this part all together.
Good.
In a separate conversation
Okay.
after the break.
Sure, we can do that. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we'll do that. We'll have to take 15 minutes.
Okay.
we'll now, the thing we have to work through is on communications, and then also the schedule for implementation. So we can just run through that hopefully relatively quickly, and then have a discussion about it, and then wrap up for lunch. So in terms of communication and engagement, as I mentioned, this is not our strong point, so open to advice about this. The first thing is setting up a web page, which we already have. I think that was circulated around to everyone, the link to that. So that's going to be a place where we can provide information about the project. I think, again, depending on consent from people, it's important to promote the missions that we do, have photos and key quotes and some description of the key activities that we undertake, because I think that's also important in terms of transparency for perhaps organisations and communities that are not involved but interested in this work. We can also put information on that site, and then links to other resources and organisations as we build a network around this project. The other step we've taken is to, our centre with the Education Directorate is to set up a network within the OECD focused on Indigenous wellbeing and economic development. So this is important because it helps raise the visibility of this topic within the OECD as an economic institution, which hasn't been a visible topic before. It enables staff who are working on this topic to build competencies, to share knowledge, to review each other's work. So that, I think this is very important in terms of building up expertise, in terms of how we work with Indigenous communities and building up the knowledge around different economic policy issues that they face. And then also coordinating input, comments and so forth to make sure that the views of other directorates, for example, if we touch on, in Peru, if we touch on this issue of environmental services and the payment or compensation from the stewardship of land, that's obviously something we would need to engage with our Environment Directorate on, because they're the experts in that topic, and bring them into the process. The other thing is being active for all of us, I think, on social media platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. That's a very effective way of communicating our messages. On missions, there is, on missions we do talk to local and national media to get asked questions about the work that we're doing and our views on different topics is something that we're comfortable with doing, and so there's opportunities to promote that. And then for us as an international organisation, there is also the dimension of how we work with and engage other international organisations on this topic that have done work on it, like particularly the UN, World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and bodies like that. So that's more, I think, a responsibility of us to make sure that we're coordinating with those bodies and incorporating their feedback. So that's just a very broad overview of the communications and engagement. So yes, we welcome your thoughts and observations in relation to that.
Yeah, very comprehensive, and I think that through or some of the opportunities that are highlighted here, or the mechanisms you include in there, updates during the projects and through the various OECD committees relating to CFP. I'm wondering, from a country participant point of view, if we cannot enhance this plan with our own respective and based on our own governance, opportunities, forums. We talk about roundtables. Perhaps we hold we hold meetings regarding economic development. In general, we can ask to add a specific, update on this project to look at it through indigenous community development plans. There's going to be the launching event as well at the end, which will be, will create momentum around the report. And then how we disseminate is who are, I think what I'd like to see detailed later on in the project, but who takes the lead on what, who makes a commitment to, bring this new knowledge forward, either in their respective countries, but for government entities. Perhaps I'm thinking that at the end, it will be an excellent opportunity for us to go talk to financial institutions and use this as a tool to have a conversation with them about their tools, their criteria, I have many ideas. So this part would be, I think, an excellent way of enhancing the communication plan around the report.
I just would like to add that the way that Canada got involved in the communication strategy that INAC colleagues and SET colleagues put in communication and make a contact with the communication team of the OECD. So we will have a common strategy for the communication part of the project, and we certainly consult this reach and indigenous communities to have a coherent communication strategy. And we think that there will be need to involve the communication teams for all the participation countries. So we will have a coherent strategy and how can we link to the OECD strategy.
I would also like to add more as to when we complete the project and have something to report, that we be given some help to prepare some maybe press releases so that those involved can be issue those and be able to promote the report. I think that would be really helpful to us to have that assistance in with the press, standard press release for us.
I'm wondering if it would be useful not waiting that long. So my shop or somebody on my team is dealing with the chartered banks in Canada almost on a weekly basis. We deal with a lot of the Aboriginal financial institutions. Having a common 2-page PowerPoint where we're all providing the same message of this is a heads up, this is what this project is. We eventually are going to want to talk to you about it, or I don't know what it should say, but one page that says this is what the project is, and then we can customize it to say this is an opportunity for you chartered banks and you Aboriginal financial institutions or whoever we're dealing with. But I think it would be good to make sure that in terms of what this project is, that across the country, so we're all saying the same thing. So I guess that my request is that language that it would be up to the OECD to craft, and you have a lot of that on the beginning parts of this deck anyway. And sorry, one other thing. So we were hoping to have a representative from the government of Quebec here, and we've had really good discussions with some of the other provincial governments, but that would also be to have that messaging available now for them would be great.
I probably get lost. I'd like somebody suggest this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Because the project is long from Indigenous perspective and from my own perspective as well, 2019 is too far away. So launch, middle term, very clear to this definition to be too specific moments, and we forget about the project in to the next. And so I know this involves some budget issues, but maybe we can find in each country workshop. We have forums and workshops all the time from these international organizations and NGOs. We will try to find the keywords where economic development in Peru related with natural resources would be ideal, because we have them all the time. So we can introduce something about the project or mention the project and the topic of it, so people don't forget about it during these 2 years, and give the idea that there is a work going on during 2 years. It's not just a specific moment.
So just around those points, I think we need to, which we have done in other projects, or we do in other projects, is just produce a bit of collateral around it, like having a one-page explanatory statement, having some frequently asked questions, if for people who might be asked about the project or asked or have media asked about the project, so we can do that. We also have a when we release a report, we also do a policy highlights, which is a much shorter document, easily consumable by decision makers. And then we'll have PowerPoint decks and so forth to communicate as well. And we'll need to do that in obviously different languages depending on which countries are involved. And then I think that this is important, a point about events. So if there are, one thing we could have in this implementation plan, which I was talking about, is some identification of some key events or forums that we can use or leverage as part of this work as well. I think that would be very helpful.
Can you embed on the webpage? Can you embed links to some of the participating organizations? Like I would, from the National Aboriginal Economic Development Board, would be something that other participants would use.
Yeah, we can do that. It really, it's at the moment I've put links up to INAC and to SEND and to, but it's really, if there are others, that you want, then we can do that.
This suggestion makes me think about another objective that we had with the project, was to create the network of economic leaders, and that would remain. So Chris's suggestion makes me think that using the web page as more of a space for discussions, maybe have a weekend and think about something that's different, but that will help communication between the leaders, and after that we could see at the end of the project how we can transform it when the project is over, what kind of tool can be thought of to keep the discussion going, progress on some of the projects that we would want to update the community that we're creating around this theme. So I think there's room here to think about the page not only as information, but a tool for networking. Because after this session, you're visiting countries individually, so having a space for all of us could be.
Yeah, I think the website is just it's a platform to provide information, and we can use things like regular updates via email to all the network, and link that to the website when there's new information available. We can do when we finish missions, we usually do a mission report. There's no reason why we can't write that up as a short blog, put that up, and then people can interact, provide their thoughts on that. But some of this also relates to governance for the project, which I've put up here. And so the point you were raising, Marie Chantal, is a couple of points are relevant here. So one is this work is overseen within a committee structure of the OECD, and so We will update and engage countries, country representatives through that committee, which means twice yearly. So it's an obligation that we have because this work is overseen by that committee. Then us, as in the OECD team, will have bilateral relationships with each country through their local team representative, and each country will then establish the governance arrangements which are suited to them, in relation to the project. Now, in relation to that, our thinking is that in this thematic work, that through the missions, through the activities such as these, that relationships will form organically. There will be new relationships which form, which people can contact on their own. Now, if there is a desire to set up a senior officials network across countries, something that I'm open to. If that's a structure that doesn't add to, too much, or the benefit of having it outweighs the cost and time of doing it. So that's something that we're open to. And obviously there's the idea of forming a network of Indigenous leaders who are interested in economic development as part of embedded in this project. And that's a matter for the individuals and the group about where they want to take that, and we're willing to support them in doing that. And the way that we have thought about it is that obviously it promotes knowledge sharing between those leaders. They can provide their expertise and input to the project, and then they help activate the recommendations as well. But there's no reason, again, why other things can't evolve from that, like mentoring or things like identifying opportunities for economic interaction or trade. Or, it's open, I think. So, but that certainly is embedded in the project, and I think the form that takes will evolve over time, and we're willing to support that as well. So yes, any comments, observations on that?
Just on these, like the oversight of the project and all of that, what role do we, for example, when you do this, and this is how I'm used to doing the research that we've done as a National Aboriginal Economic Development Board in Canada, is I get to see a draft, and just to make sure that it really reflects some of the information we looked at. Is that something that you normally do with these projects? Because I would really like to have the opportunity in going forward with this to have look at the first draft, to be able to comment or maybe add some clarification and perspective. I think that if I could, and I think that that's really been of value to the reports that our board has done, is that we've always circulated it back. Just to make sure that we're saying the things that that they're reflected the way we wanted them to be reflected. Is that an opportunity in the oversight of this project? Do things come back to us again?
Yes, they do. So that's a standard part of our process, is for the stakeholders that we engage with, to give them an opportunity to comment on the draft before. Yeah. So the process is that we'll obviously do the analysis, we'll do the write-up, we'll have a draft, we'll test that with the countries. Usually we get comments and then we revise, and then we send back again to make sure if there's any that's been considered and addressed, and if not, why, and so forth. And then it goes to the committee of the OECD, and they then have the opportunity to, all the country representatives have the opportunity to look at it. Because all the decisions in the OECD committees are decisions by consensus amongst the countries. So then the committee endorses them.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the Indigenous participants, I know it's going to go back to the governance involved for sure, and I think that's great and very helpful too. But I also am hoping that we get a chance to also see what the report says, so that we can make sure it's reflective of in our kind of views, and I think that'll just help enrich the report. I'm not sure, this is different from what you've done before, so I just wanted to check on that Stefan and Warren and our good friends from Colombia will also get a chance to see a draft and as well as the comments.
Being a representative of my government at the OECD, I can say that I'm comfortable with that.
I think, yes, we would support that. But it's a decision of countries to do that. But the way in which the whole project is set up is it involves Indigenous communities. So it wouldn't, to me, it would not make sense for you not to have an opportunity to, based on the methodology we set up. Yeah. But yeah. Okay, so we have, as we said, we use this metaphor of a circle. People who are involved in this project, but there are other countries who are part of our committee who are not part of the project at the moment and only come on board at a later time. So it's important in terms of how we engage with these countries because we're doing a thematic report which can have implications for all OECD countries which have Indigenous populations. So I regularly update those countries through their national ministries and also their permanent delegations about this project and where it's heading, and have conversations with them about any issues that they see with that. And then we'll formally engage the committee, as I said, when it meets twice yearly with updates on the project. What we're thinking is in the thematic report that we would have a very short 2-page profile, which has some of the key information about Indigenous populations across the countries which are members of the OECD, and also those countries which participate in the Regional Development Policy Committee but are not members of the OECD. So Colombia is one of them that wants to part of the project, but others like Morocco, the Russian Federation as well, so these countries. And I think those profiles will have some basic information, again, about how many Indigenous people there are, where they live, what some of the key statistics say about their wellbeing, and what is the policy and institutional framework for economic development for Indigenous communities. And I think this just builds up a standard database which we don't have. We can't answer those basic questions at the moment, and I think that basic information will then help some further international comparative work on this topic. And then what we want to do is to keep open for other countries to join in different forms. And some countries did want to join this project, but there are other financial constraints at the moment or elections which mitigate against the joining, but they wish to join at a later date. So we'll keep that open as well. Now, the missions. So this is important. Now, this is just very completely arbitrary, although I have tried to look at school holidays and public holidays and different events which will keep us busy and climatic conditions as well, which is very... yeah, so anyway, we have to work this out. As I said, the implementation plan is the mechanism to work this out. But I just wanted to indicate that during this period we'll be quite busy with gathering information, and it really depends on where you go. So in the case of Australia, if we do some case studies, below the tropics, then that can occur, in February. If it's above, then it needs to occur, April, October period. So it really, you have to balance up a whole bunch of factors, and you don't want all the missions sort of happening all at the same time, week after week, because my wife will kill me, and I don't work anyway, so that's not...
Winter in Canada would kill me.
I'm going to get frostbite or anything. So what we're thinking is that, perhaps at the Rural Conference, we have this Rural Concept Conference every 2 years, so maybe we can hold a little workshop or something there. And the other thing we said in the project plans, we had this the midterm project workshop, which I think doesn't necessarily have to happen in May, but I think it would be good at some point next year for all of us to come together as a group, again, to assess progress, to share lessons, And perhaps, as I said, maybe other countries are joining, they can come into our discussion in that way as well. That is the missions, and then just quickly in terms of how we're thinking about staggering this out, what we, in this court at the top there in the last part of this year, we're building the project, which is part of what we're doing today and the last couple of days. And then the next year, we'll do the missions, hopefully in the sort of first half of next year, maybe into September. Through all that, we'll do an analysis and write-up. Towards the end of next year, we'll then go into the committee process where we get the committee to consider the report, and then we have a launch in the hopefully around April, May 2019. So, does that mean? And then, and that will be the finishing point for the project. So that just gives you a sense of scheduling. Now, I'm not sure which ones arose most questions. Obviously, we had the mission schedule. I talked a bit about project governance. So again, the floor is open for discussion.
To avoid torturing the researchers to send them up to the high Arctic if there is going to be an Arctic case study in the winter. Travel in remote regions of the Canadian Arctic in the winter, you face massive delays. It can be, going into communities that have one flight a week means that a 1 week visit turns into a 2 week visit. So just see you go in February to say take a charge rack or somewhere. It may be worth doing now, but from a logistics point of view, that it may be easier in the summer. Although the bugs can be
el trabajo de la mitad del proyecto no tiene nada que ver con la salida de campo en Colombia. Son dos actividades diferentes. Sí, es que estoy confundida porque están en una sola casilla. Yo tendría que consultar, porque en Colombia estamos no solo comprometidos con todo lo que es asociado a la implementación de los acuerdos de paz, que eso nos ha demandado una agenda muy complicada, y además entramos a elecciones políticas del presidente el año entrante. Entonces, quisiera consultar mejor la fecha y poder decirles si esa que está allí propuesta es pertinente.
Look, I'd take those two comments on board. We certainly don't want to go into Arctic the deep dark winter. So if we're talking about events, perhaps the most important event is national elections. So we need to be aware of that, and obviously climate plays what's the best time to visit that part of Colombia as well in terms of ensuring reliability in terms of transport and so forth. But yeah, that's something we have to work through. And so I think again we need to be flexible and probably work out a couple of options, and then work that through with other countries, and then we can come up with something sensible that works for everyone.
Colombia es como la Amazonas, que todos van a ficar chancudos. She said internet joke, yeah. If you go to Colombia, you will get bitten by mosquitoes anyway. So
Malaria, yellow fever.
leishmaniasis.
So I think what we're trying to think this through. You know, we're setting up new forms of governance here, particularly this champions this network of leaders. That's very important. And you know, again, if there's, I don't want to over-engineer structures. You know, if there is desire to set up a network with senior officials, we can. But I think it's more. I think through the process of missions and peer review and having a mid-term project workshop, it'll hopefully those relationships will form and strengthen.
I don't want to add any more. So I'm going to try. No, so I'm going to try not to. However, and I know I've missed parts of our discussion over the last 2.5 days. I'm sorry about that, but I don't know if it was mentioned. Because we're not starting at the same time, the site visit, we can turn that into an opportunity. So I was wondering, and of course we'll do complete summary report, but that will take a little while. You need to get back, write them. Could we think of having, you know, just we have this email list of this group. So first, once we've established our criteria to select our community, to share that with the others, so we can not only get a view of what we will look into in a country, but then as we build up, you know, and as the project, we start having a view of, you know, what will come out in terms of knowledge sharing and information sharing from others. So, and see if there are complementarities and look at or factor in the new criteria to see that other countries have been put a lot of emphasis on. So that's the first. So first, share criteria for selection as we go down, and then again use the email list. Quick email, you know. We were just in Colombia, or we just finished Australia. Key points, you know, what went well, what didn't, watch out. This part of the discussion took twice the time that we thought it would on the agenda. You might want to rethink your schedule. And then we can all learn as we go from each other and improve during the process, perhaps, our approach.
Well, I think, so the next step will be this development and implementation plan for each country. And I think that what we'll do is look at each of those plans and try and, you know, develop them in a way which ensures there is some complementarity between countries. I'm not sure if I want to open it up to a peer review amongst all of you, because that might generate another way of work, which, but yeah, we'll certainly do that and then share it amongst the countries. And then I don't think the key points add to work. As I said, we do mission reports anyway. I don't see that they don't have highly sensitive, or sometimes I do like to delete that information. But you know, there's no barrier to no sharing that information with people. I think. And as I said, we should be transparent about what we do for people, because this will generate interest outside this group. Access the information, as long as it's not, you know, as long as it's sense check, sensitive check. If there's such a word. Sensitivity check.
Just on this timetable, then, what is the Indigenous participants' role in regards to these meetings? When we're visiting our countries, that we get together, that we're looking at here, or I know you mentioned the possible role, but I don't know if we're involved in all of those meetings or just certain ones. If you could clarify that.
I think it's again, we have to set the budget and set our visits, and we need to be equitable in terms of giving people opportunity to participate in missions. But that would be only one thing, is participating, and that may be only to our country. It just depends on how we plan that out. And then within the country, it's as I said, with the bring up the thing about the missions again. So in the missions, usually we meet with, I mean, certainly we also meet with ministries, but we meet with people, organisations, we meet with chambers of commerce, we meet with individual business owners and so forth. And then certainly you'd be involved in that. But I imagine, because for you, you're also involved in this project, that you would probably work with Chantel and Christopher in terms of planning out the mission for Canada. Yeah. And so in that sense, you know, the role will determined by what the role you want to play in the discussions you have with them. Oh, sorry, and yeah, sorry.
Thank you. If I may, I just received a message from the government of Sweden that I'd like to read out to the assembled group. Greetings from Sweden. We will sign off soon. It has been really nice to listen to all of you from a distance on WebEx and the YouTube channel. We've learned a lot about Indigenous people. Your discussions have also given us new insights and perspectives, which will be useful for us in this study. Thank you, everyone. The objective and scope of this study looks very promising. The Swedish government wants to send our special thanks to Mr. Stefan Mikaelsen for representing the Swedish part of Sami. We are really glad that he could attend on place in Quebec when we couldn't. And just as Mrs. Inga Fronsen-Harvin said yesterday, many thanks to the OECD and the organizations in Canada for their work, and to Huron-Wendat First Nation for hosting this kickoff workshop. I'm sure we will all meet later on in this project. Regards.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah. I know he's sent me a photo of him watching on the train, so very diligent. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Well, I mean, the key thing is next steps. I think for us, this event has been it's been great. I think for now, so I think it's given us a lot. It's not something we usually do. Tomorrow and I were talking. We don't usually open ourselves like this. We usually have an approach and then we roll it out, but we knew that would work in this case. And we have got a lot of good advice, reality checks, and intelligence that we didn't have before, which will feed back into how we design this work. The next thing that we need to do is, as I said, work with each country on how they're going to implement the project. We really need to, I think, do that over the next sort of six weeks or so, and we'll communicate a process to do that. We'll produce some proceedings from this event, a summary, which we'll check by with you to make sure that you're comfortable with that, and then my commitment is to be open in terms of my communication with the project. So as things happen, as I said, if we have views of other countries and so forth, I'll keep you updated on that as well. And I think as a group, we'll meet again and we'll have a discussion, but it will be a different discussion because this discussion was about getting to a starting point. But I think next time when we meet, we will achieve some things together, and we can talk about accelerate them as well, and then lay the foundation for the next phase of the project. So I'll just I won't completely close off now because I think others can say words. But yeah, I'd just like to thank you all for your time because I know how valuable your time is. And giving us the opportunity to do this work because it's a privilege. I mean that from my heart. It really is a privilege to do this work. So thank you very much. So I don't know if anyone else wants to say any words.
I have just some small token of appreciation for you all coming to Canada here, and I'd like to distribute that first and then speak about it if I could. Very small piece of All these words to get around. Just worried that I think I have enough. I know I have for the, there must be more inside here. Yes. It's, counted right.
Big wedge.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, I'll stop speaking the microphone for translation purposes. But one of the, well, the gifts to the ladies, those are the medicine wheel. And I spoke at the beginning of our visit here about the circle and how important that is. And I thought that would be very fitting for us to remember that circle. And the 4 different colors of the beads represent the 4 directions, and people have come from the 4 directions to be here to join us for this important kickoff of this project that I truly feel is going to benefit Indigenous people. And so that's very important to us. And then I wanted for the men to have, these are all produced here, by the way, in Wendake. I wanted to have the men to see the, these are representatives of the animal life that we have to think about when we're thinking about regional development. So some of you have the wolves, some of you have the bear and the wolf and buffalo, actually, on your pendants. So this is to remind you of the nature that we're going to be, we have to keep in mind when we're talking about regional development. And for the people from the government, this is one of our sacred medicines, is this sweetgrass. And I think, and working in this area of working with Indigenous people, that you have to be reminded of the sacredness of the people that you're working with, and the work that, and the original peoples, the inhabitants of this land. I would have given medicine to everybody, but I know you can't travel through customs to different countries. But I think it's really important for the government people here to understand, and I know that we've shared this important gift, but it's also a purification gift where you burn that, and I would encourage you to pray as you look at the work that we're embarking on, and to purify yourself with that medicine. It's not a decorative thing, it's a living thing, and it's something that I think that all people should have as a way to commune with the Creator. And this is one way to do that in this important work. So on behalf of the Indigenous people here in these lands, I wish to thank you all for coming here and for being a part of this circle. Now we're all related in this circle, and I'm very thankful that I could see the passion and interest amongst all of you in working with us together, and I consider you all good friends and even family as we go forward and embark on this and work together from a good place with good thoughts. So in my language, we say "chmiigwech," which means a big thank you to you all for being here and helping with this.
Thanks for those words, Warren, for this gift. It's great. Thank you. And I think our friend from Colombia wanted to share some stories with us as well.
Primero que todo, pues agradecer el espacio, la humanidad que tenemos entre los pueblos indígenas, de poder encontrar desde un sur a un norte, con el mismo pensamiento de unidad de pensamiento, como pueblos indígenas a nivel del mundo. Nosotros, que hacemos parte de la selva amazónica, también tenemos materiales rituales, instrumentos tradicionales, en la cual hemos venido identificando en varias oportunidades, varios espacios de concentración que nuestros herederos miles de años lo han venido manteniendo, en la cual hacemos como, traemos algunos instrumentos de viajes, transporte, limitaciones en algunos aeropuertos, de poder transportar cosas que no lo distinguen, entonces eso nos preocupa también. Poder compartir experiencias de instrumentos que tenemos en nuestro pueblo. Traemos una corona, lo llamamos corona, es algo ritual, es algo ceremonial en unas memorias indígenas que traemos, que se utilizan mucho para algunos rituales, algunas ceremonias de importancia. Eso releva mucho la riqueza faunística que tenemos, las variedades de aves que tenemos, la parte artesanal de la participación de las mujeres. Es muy creativa poder tejer, estudiar, y es como el arte de ellas de poder representar a la parte artesanal. También traemos un símbolo que he visto mucho que han utilizado los huesos o los colmillos de los animales. Nosotros también tenemos esa variedad de especies con otros nombres, pero que son similares, que también lo utilizamos para rituales. Son collares tradicionales que también tenemos, que tenemos simplemente como para que lo separan, que son hechos con materiales propios también de la región. También traemos un símbolo de un árbol, un bastón de mano, que hemos utilizado para varias ceremonias también, que también hemos visto árboles aquí. Para nosotros este árbol es un árbol duradero, muy fino para construcciones de casas específicamente, o de malocas, la llamamos nosotros que vimos. Y la representatividad que tenemos es un pez. Es un pez que tiene que ver mucho con el océano, que también en estos ríos que son dulces también existen, le llamamos delfín rosado, que tiene que ver con una asimilación que también hay peces en el océano que tienen como esas mismas familiaridades de especies. En estas ocasiones pues hemos traído poca artesanía, somos dirigentes nuevos también que estamos aprendiendo, estamos como en esa carta de navegación de traer, recoger experiencias, ya que nos dieron esa oportunidad de poder llegar hasta acá, pues enriquecernos de experiencias para poder compartir con nuestros pueblos y llegarle allá con un buen mensaje que hemos observado y lleno las experiencias también con la misma dificultad y la misma problemática que estamos nosotros pues, en el interior o en la selva amazónica. De toda manera, nosotros nos sentimos muy agradecidos por el apoyamiento, por la invitación que hicieron, muy formal, una experiencia grande para nuestra juventud, poder llevar esto a nuestros mayores. Son muy difíciles también de moverlos de su asiento y de pensamiento, pero sin embargo son los mensajeros de ellos que podrían dar información gracias al comité de la OEA, que esa expectativa en temas que hemos podido escuchar en estos 3 días, pues nos han llegado como una buena información de nueva cultura de mirar nuestro desarrollo económico al interior de nuestros pueblos. Que hay muchos elementos que comenzar a pensar, a mirar, en un futuro a desaparecerlo físico-culturalmente como pueblos indígenas de la región. Estos temas de 3 días que hemos podido entender es una gran oportunidad de poder poner en el estatus a los pueblos indígenas y comenzar a tratar cuáles serían sus estrategias de una alternativa económicas propias de actuar los entornos de su territorio donde vive, acompañado obviamente con la participación del gobierno, de Estado, de dinámicas del gobierno que tenemos, e ir enseñándoles de que también conjuntamente en el método de diálogo pues podemos construir una buena información, un buen acercamiento de diálogo que nos sirva a un sentido de mirar más de fondo cuál sería como la responsabilidad de poder salvaguardar estos mitología o otras costumbres ancestrales que se han mantenido desde el principio de los pueblos indígenas. Con esto pues no decirlo que hasta luego, despedirnos, sino que es un espacio más que actuar toda la gente que he visto. Va a haber momentos, espacios en los que nos podemos ir reencontrando, reconstruyendo, armonizando más el pensamiento, porque nosotros hablamos mucho de pensamiento y de palabra. No sé qué es simplemente el discurso, sino las obras que se vayan materializando, que los pueblos de la humanidad se sientan tranquilos en lo que se dice, que se vaya actuando de una manera pues considerada, ¿no? Porque entendemos la dinámica de todos los países, tiene una dinámica diferente, pero el colectivo es no nos despedimos todavía porque todavía nos quedamos hasta mañana. Le vamos a agradecer a todo el equipo, a todos nuestros colegas indígenas, a la dirección de que hemos podido llegar nosotros hasta acá, estamos muy agradecidos. Conocer experiencias nuevas, estamos demasiado, no sé cómo reconocer esto, pero estamos demasiado hacer hermandad y conocer nuevas países que para nosotros son impresionantes. Eso sería como mi manera de poder como agradecer de este escenario y llevar buena influencia para nuestro país colombiano y nuestros pueblos indígenas que somos de vida multicultural, de varias diversidades de lenguaje. Tenemos una diversidad muy impresionante que tenemos que a través del proyecto mirando a ver cómo experimentando esta experiencia en Colombia, entonces que no somos únicos, que no somos multicultural. Muchas gracias. Eso quería como mi apreciación de este tema.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, primero que todo, darle gracias a Dios por brindarnos esta oportunidad a nosotros, como indígenas del Amazonas, llegar hasta un extremo en que tenemos esa prioridad de llegar aquí. Agradecerle al sistema organizativo por recibirnos, la invitación. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Para nosotros, como jóvenes, hablo de mi personalidad, uno se siente muy feliz al llegar aquí a ser partícipe de un proceso que se va a traer desde una base para un mejoramiento de nuestro pueblo indígena. Es muy bueno saber que hay medios que aportan para nuestro futuro, para nuestro bienestar común de aquí a muchos años. Me siento muy feliz también de estar aquí. Lo que ven aquí es una representación que pudimos traer porque es muy difícil un trámite de un país a otro. Sí quería mostrarle algo, el contenido que tiene dentro de este test, como lo ven así por encima, es un instrumento, no es alimenticio, pero sí en la parte cultural, es propio natural de los pueblos indígenas en la parte de la Amazonía colombiana. Es una planta sagrada, vi no sé, nosotros le decimos maloca, acá es como una casa de los pueblos indígenas de por acá, vimos esta planta, que es el tabaco. O sea, quiere decir que los indígenas de acá
lo cultivaban, pero no sabemos el concepto de por qué lo cultivaban, de qué forma lo utilizaban. En el pueblo de nosotros cultivan mucho esta planta hasta ahora y de millares de años. Tiene como unos pasos para poder llegar a hacer este elemento. Tienen dos, o sea, aquí hay una mezcla de las áreas de la planta que se cocina, se merma y sale, decimos nosotros, la parte más espesa. Luego hay una planta del monte, que son hay algunas variedades, pero hay una en general que es más cultural, o sea, se mezcla, también tiene un proceso para que llegue a ser un instrumento en la parte espiritual. Los indígenas, o sea, lo más que todos los hombres lo utilizan con una mezcla de macoca, que es una coca muy propia de nosotros, para el tema de la espiritualidad. Muchos lo utilizan en las malocas, para el trabajo, para realizar medicinas, curaciones a niños, a viejos, para actos rituales. O sea, esta planta es muy utilizada. Entonces, lo traje de esta forma para que pudiera hacerlo llegar hasta acá y darles a conocer, o sea, una parte muy importante es en el tema cultural de los pueblos indígenas. Pues el complemento desde que la coca no pudimos traerlo, pero sí existe allá y sí los hombres mambean, digámoslo así, las mujeres no lo hacen, pero sí consumen el ambiente. O sea, es como para uno estar más concentrado, adquirir más conocimiento, bueno, le quita el sueño, bueno, de todo en general. Sí, bueno, por otra parte, agradecerle el regalo que nos dio aquí la compañera. Nosotros estábamos, o sea, de mi parte estaba pensando yo que me llevo de aquí como recuerdo, menos mala esta, entonces tengo como algo y más, bueno, la experiencia adquirida aquí, o sea, ya la participación de un joven es algo muy importante porque se dice allá que los jóvenes son el futuro de mañana. Entonces, decimos nosotros también que lo que se plantee de una base, nosotros como jóvenes vamos llevando ese proceso a un mejor vivir, porque los ancianos se mueren, los líderes también, bueno, eso se va transcurriendo tiempo tras tiempo, entonces de aquí a mañana nosotros vamos a ser líderes mayores, entonces una participación de nosotros como jóvenes es algo muy importante, entonces por eso, o sea, hacemos la presencia de un mayor como tal, un líder, y de un joven líder que voy empezando estos procesos. Entonces es muy importante. Agradecerle aquí a todos en general y me siento muy feliz de estar aquí. No quiero que sea la única oportunidad de estar acá en un escenario como esto, sino que también haya varios que podamos participar. Entonces sería como un mayor conocimiento, evento tras evento, uno ir socializándose con demás personas, más conocimientos para un buen vivir de nosotros, que lo podamos llevar en práctica. Muchas gracias nuevamente aquí a todos y gracias.
Yo quiero ir a los agradecimientos. En lo personal ha sido una experiencia muy rica. Conocer la situación de pobreza, por ejemplo, de la misma relación, contacto con esa realidad y por supuesto conocer la realidad de los pueblos indígenas de otros países también muy valioso. Y creo que para Colombia este proyecto, a pesar de que es consistente, digamos, en la diversidad y en la necesidad de hacer algunas precisiones, tal vez, creo que es muy valioso que el gobierno, digamos, tenga estas recomendaciones que dejan desde la ONU para poder mejorar nuestro relacionamiento y sobre todo garantizar los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Y espero que nos veamos las próximas.
Thank you very much for those words and also the thought that you guys put into sharing that with us. That's again, it's a real privilege to hear about your culture and your traditions, and for you to be able to share that with us. Thank you for putting the thought into that, and your words about young people are so important because you're the leader, you will be the leader. I'm sure you're a role model already. So to foster that leadership is something that we can do that. If that's an outcome of this project, that makes it so worthwhile.
I'd like to say a few words too, but also to start off with a bit of an explanation in that in Indigenous cultures in Australia, its kinship is very strong. In fact, everyone in the universe, everything in the universe is related to the kinship structures in a very strong and responsible way. So for instance, in the kinship structure, you are either Dua or Yurija, and you work together in that space. And it is a very strong relationship. So I'd like to thank the Wendake brothers and sisters, who are our brothers and sisters in that universe, for having us as guests on their country, as well as the OECD for inviting us here today, and also to everyone else who have shared their experiences, skills and knowledge to make this a better project and an important project. We see in Australia economic development, economic growth for Indigenous people as part of our survival of our culture, of building our culture and making our culture strong. And so that's why we want to be heavily involved in sharing of these ideas and building things and making the Indigenous economic development part of all forums on a global stage, as well as being part of forums within our own domestic area, countries in Australia. So thank you for having us. Thank you for listening to us, and we hope to move forward on this whole project together. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I know how busy you are, so thanks a lot for coming and sharing your expertise with us. I don't know if does anyone else want to make a? Yep.
Just very quickly, putting things like this together is an incredible amount of work. So a huge thanks to the OECD team, but also to my INAC colleagues and DEC colleagues, as well as to Don on the Canadian side, who did an enormous amount of legwork to make this happen. So, especially when something is international in scope, the amount of the logistics and the amount of work. So, merci beaucoup à tout le monde. It's been a big success.
Thank you very much for the spirit of safeguarding by the Wendake people, making it possible to wake up in the middle of the night despite strange sound outdoors, also being able to sleep quite fast again. It is a privilege to be able to be here. And in ordinary case, the Assembly Parliament does not like to be part of the entertainment. because there are people represented. But we will make an exception now to honor the state delegation and brothers and sisters. Sunshine and bird singing, that is Sunderland. And my thoughts goes back to old memories again and again. Le cubas muito taler, tortarnella yo con che c'ero jebaiura. Jävers bajs i laglotta leisami enan. Le cubas muito taler. Le cubas muito taler. I wish the participants good health, a long life, and a safe homecoming.
Thanks. Do you guys want to formally close it off as the hosts? I don't feel on. Do that.
No.
Safe journey home, and we're looking forward to seeing you, meeting you, and working together fruitfully on this project again very soon. Safe journey home.
Pleasure.